Hello there, trash pandas! So this is the point that I would normally start talking about some masterpiece of a game that's completely changed my life. And let's be honest, I never deviate from that system. But this time is a little bit different. You see, Spore is a game that I really wanted to love. It's a game that I've sunk thousands of hours into, and I always end up having fun playing it, but I just always felt that it never lived up to its potential, and I think it's time that I explained why. Spore, for anybody who doesn't know, is a bit of a unique life sim developed by Maxis. The goal is to take a single cell organism all the way through all of its stages of evolution until you create an advanced species and take your civilization into space, with every stage heavily focused on customization, and potentially every creature you're encountering being made by another player. And if that all sounds amazing and too good to be true, well, yeah, that's because it kind of is. But each stage is vastly different, so I'm going to cut this down into chunks and see if I can tie it all together at the end. You pick a planet to begin your journey. And I'll say this right now, the sheer number and variety of planets is just astounding, especially for the time that Spore came out. There's literally an entire galaxy of unique worlds, and eventually you can visit any of them, even planets you've already developed species on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We begin as this tiny little cell crashing into the planet on a meteorite. And your immediate goal is just eat everything in sight. Well, based on whether you chose to be a carnivore or herbivore anyway. And then later on there's the option to become an omnivore. As you grow, you'll gain DNA, and to evolve you'll have to go and find a mate to reproduce and spend your DNA on parts that you've either collected from other creatures or just dotted around the world. There's nothing really more to the cell stage, it's just eat things and don't die. And then eventually your creature will spontaneously grow a brain and decide it wants to leave the ocean. So the creature creator will open up and give you a chance to give it legs. Or you can just decide to not cooperate at all and just leave it as a wriggling slug beast. No judgment. So that brings us to the creature stage. The goal here isn't too different to the cell stage, there's just more mechanics in a 3D environment. You basically want to either befriend or murderize every other creature you come across, while maintaining your hunger and once again collecting parts and DNA. This is probably the stage that I've spent the most time in, just simply because this is the stage you create the creature that you'll take through the rest of the game. There's a nice progression of parts, each part has 4 tiers, and you unlock the more powerful parts by either finding larger piles of bones or interacting with the alpha variants of more developed species. And honestly, the creature creator is just so much fun. Aside from a limit to the number of parts you can use, which you can disable through cheats anyway, there's basically no limit to what you can create. So of course the library of creatures is a little bit suspect. But if that bothers you, the game allows you to just block creatures or creators you don't want popping into your worlds anyway. So every now and then you'll grow a little bit larger and gain more health. You'll also gain an additional follower slot. You can fill these either with members of your own species, or any species that you've befriended. Or you can do what I do, hunt down these wandering rogue species and make friends. They have insanely high health, and usually the most powerful parts. Befriend one of these things, and you've basically just won the creature stage. But eventually your brain will grow large enough that you'll discover fire, and so it's time to leave the simple life behind. The tribal stage I just find hilarious. So the logic here is that your creature has learnt to use tools, but you see there's absolutely no requirement for it to have hands. In fact, the only part you technically need is a mouth, so it's entirely possible to play the entire rest of the game as an angry Tic Tac. And since the game has to work out the very best way to animate these abominations, it leads to some glorious sights. So now that you have control over all of your tribe members, you'll have to keep them fed and equipped while fending off rival tribes. You'll also have to spend food hatching new tribe members, as well as placing buildings for your creatures to pick up weapons or tools. The basic premise beyond that remains the same, either befriend or kill the other tribes. Each conquered tribe will then add another piece to your totem pole while unlocking some new clothing and buildings for you to use. You can also go around domesticating other creatures to gain eggs as a source of food, and these will also help defend your own tribe. As an added bonus, if you leave the creature stage with allies who aren't actually your own species, they'll actually come pre-domesticated. But the tribal stage is pretty short, and once you've conquered all of the other local tribes, you'll spontaneously learn how to make vehicles. So we move forward. The civilization stage is where things start to take a little bit of a turn. You no longer have to worry about food, your entire existence now just revolves around spice and capitalism. Those vents dotted around the planet that early on could launch your creature into the air? Mine them. Mine them all! There'll be a number of other tribes progressing into advanced civilizations as time goes on, so no points for guessing what you have to do next. Your first city will either be war, religious, or economic focused depending on how you completed the tribal stage. So you'll either have to destroy, convert, or buy the other cities. And this is also where the customization starts getting a little bit crazy. On top of having a lot more clothing to dress your creature up in, you'll be tasked with designing all of your buildings and your vehicles. Or if you're just really lazy like me, you can just pick one from the list. You'll spend so much time zoomed out that you can't really see them anyway. But if the map looks a little bit cluttered, you don't actually have to worry about every single nation. Once you've captured 6 cities, you effectively unlock a nuke button regardless of what city type you have. So you can just skip the rest of the stage just by spending a ridiculous amount of money. And so once you've unified, or destroyed, the entire planet, there's only one more place you can go. So we've made it to the end game. The space stage is what the game has been building towards the whole time. In comparison to the other stages, it's huge. There's an obscene amount of tools and ranks to unlock, and honestly, I've never come close to getting them all. When you initially head off into space, you can't really go far, but after a short tutorial, you'll unlock a warp drive, and then you're off to do just whatever. I'm not even joking, you get a pat on the back and you're sent out into the unknown. You can pick up quests from your home planet that sort of act like a tutorial to point you in the right direction, but really from this point on, there is no right or wrong way to play. Befriend aliens, terraform planets, throw wildlife into space, blow up inhabited worlds, trade spice! You basically just want to look at this huge list of badges and complete whatever tasks they require. Most badges will unlock more tools for you to use, letting you travel further or defend yourself or improve your settlements. Oh, and seriously, trade spice with every single inhabited planet you come across. The amount of money you need in this stage is just ridiculous. The actual goal of this stage is to make your way into the centre of the galaxy, but honestly, I've only ever done it the once. It unlocks a fancy terraforming gadget, and that's about it. And honestly, the angry teddy bears surrounding the centre just make it a hassle. So, if you can't tell, I've sank a lot of hours into Spore, and I genuinely enjoy it. So then why am I complaining? Well, I'm a grumpy old man. But more importantly, Spore just pales in comparison to what it was meant to be. Let me explain. Spore was in development for a very, very long time. The project kept having its release date pushed back further and further for years. It was all just too ambitious for the technology that was available at the time. And so eventually a lot of planned content was just scrapped and we were left with an unfinished game. Each stage has completely different mechanics, and there's not really any blending between them. You fill up your evolution bar, you click the button, and bam, you're on to the next stage. But this wasn't always the plan. The cell and creature stage in particular were originally going to blend perfectly at one another. You were developed from a cell into an aquatic animal, and it was then entirely your decision whether to actually move on to land or not. You could have been able to take an aquatic civilization all the way through the game, developing underwater cities and completely changing the way everything was meant to work. The creature stage itself was also going to be a lot less simple. Rather than just going from nest to nest with mostly stationary creatures, you'd be wandering the land, hunting prey or avoiding predators. Your mating call, for example, would have to be used really carefully as it could alert larger creatures. And don't get me started on the trees. They showed off the plant editor early in development, and it clearly exists because somebody had to make them, but we never got access to it. Honestly, the tribal and civilization stages are fine. I don't really have too much of a gripe about them. They're pretty basic, but they just do what they need to. And it was always going to be awkward filling the midsections. But then, the space stage could have had a bit more in-depth mechanics to it, and a lot of tools I feel were scrapped or changed. The most noticeable is that early in development they showed you could beam down to planets to interact directly with them. They sort of kept this in with the hologram tool, but in a much less involved way. And yes, they did bring out the Galactic Adventures DLC that did allow you to beam down to planets, but I think that is entirely its own topic. I followed Spore's development all the way through. I'd never before been as hyped for a game, and while what we ended up with was fine, it just wasn't what it was meant to be. It sounds weird me saying this about a game that I've sunk so much time into, but I just felt betrayed. And it's made me hesitant to get excited about more ambitious projects ever since. Let me put it this way, I adore No Man's Sky, but I wasn't the least bit surprised when it ended up in a similar position on release. But at least that's been heavily updated since. I think, at the end of the day, Spore was just far too ambitious for its time. Had it been made today, I think the technology exists to make it far beyond what was even planned, but I don't hold out any hope that we'll ever get an updated version or a sequel. And so that is why, as much as I adore it, Spore will forever be the game that broke my heart. So, if you've been enjoying my nonsense ramblings, if you'd like to push the good YouTube buttons and leave a comment, I would appreciate the support so much. And as always, my socials are in the description below if you'd like to see what else I've been up to. But for now, thanks so much for watching.